Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name?
Michael Lank, L-A-N-K.
And how are you employed, sir?
I'm a lieutenant with the Canton Police.
And how long in total have you been a member of the Canton Police?
Over 24 years.
And how long have you held the rank of lieutenant with the Canton Police?
It'll be 2 years in August.
Now, prior to, well, let me ask you first. With reference to your responsibilities as a lieutenant, if you could explain to the jury just in general terms, what are your duties and responsibilities as a lieutenant?
I oversee the gun licensing and patrol.
And prior to working as a lieutenant, what was your role with the Canton Police before that?
I was a detective sergeant.
And how long were you a detective sergeant?
From September of 21 until August of 22.
And during that time frame as a detective sergeant, what were your duties and responsibilities with regard to the Canton Police at that point?
To oversee the Detective Bureau, ensure that all reports were issued to respective detectives and completed.
Now, you're also familiar with the role within the Canton Police of a sort of shift sergeant, is that correct?
Yes.
And if you could explain to the jury sort of what are the differences between what a shift sergeant does and what a detective sergeant does?
Shift sergeant's primary responsibility is to run the daily shift, give out sectors to each of the cars, and dispatch cruisers to appropriate areas, so forth.
And if I could turn your attention to the morning of January 29th, 2022. At some point after 6 a.m., did you receive a call in regard to a dispatch that your department had received?
Yes.
And who, if anyone, called you around that time?
Sergeant Sean Good.
Do you know approximately what time Sergeant Good called you?
I believe it was 6:08.
And with reference to that call, the initial call from Sergeant Good, what, if any, information did he relay to you at that time?
Sergeant Good stated that there was a gentleman found in the snow at 34 Fairview Road, and he was in very grave condition, and he brought it to my attention that he was also a Boston police officer.
And subsequent to that, through the course of your investigative work on this case, did you learn who that unresponsive male was?
Yes.
And who did you learn it?
John O'Keefe.
And upon receiving that call, where did you go?
I went to 34 Fairview Road.
And if you know, about what time would you estimate that you arrived in the area of 34 Fairview Road?
I live fairly close, so I was on scene by, I believe it was 6:24, 6:25.
And upon your arrival, who, if anyone else, from your department was there prior to you?
Officer Sarif, Officer Mullaney, and Sergeant Good.
And when you arrived, beyond sort of the other officers from your department, what, if any, other activity or what, if any, other persons did you observe on scene?
When I arrived, I observed that the ambulance was still there. There was multiple EMTs, and I observed some witnesses also.
And with respect to the ambulance, it's your understanding Mr. O'Keefe was in that ambulance?
Yes.
And did you ever see Mr. O'Keefe on that morning?
I did not.
And at some point, the other officers who preceded your arrival, did they direct you your attention to where Mr. O'Keefe was found when they first arrived?
They did.
And where was that sort of in relation to the property, as you recall?
If you're looking at 34 Fairview Road, it was on the left side of the property, about 8 feet from the road.
And in that sort of general area, what, if any, sort of landmarks or other sort of items in that area of the front yard did you observe?
I observed a flagpole. There was a fire hydrant and some brush area over there.
And upon your arrival on scene, who was the first person that you spoke to?
Sergeant Sean Good.
And you had some conversation with him, is that correct?
That's correct.
And then following talking to Sergeant Good, who, if anyone else, did you speak to on scene?
I spoke to Jennifer McCabe.
And where was it in relation to the scene that you first spoke to Jennifer McCabe?
I believe I spoke to Jennifer McCabe right in front of Mark Cruiser 683, which was assigned to Officer Sarif.
And then about how long a conversation was that initially with Ms. McCabe?
I would say probably 8 or 9 minutes.
And in addition to Ms. McCabe, what, if any, other sort of civilians did you observe in that area around that time?
I observed Kerry Roberts, and I don't recall seeing anybody else at the scene while I was focused on Ms. McCabe.
Now, with respect to Jennifer McCabe, I'll strike that. So, after you spoke with Ms. McCabe for 8 or 9 minutes, then who, if anyone else, did you speak to at that time?
So after I spoke with Ms. McCabe, I believe I was able to then contact the CPAC unit.
And what is the CPAC unit?
CPAC unit is the investigative division for the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office.
Why did you contact them?
Because I was made aware at some point that it did not appear that Mr. O'Keefe was going to survive, and I wanted them to be aware of the situation.
And did they respond at that time?
No.
Now, with reference to, is that sort of a typical protocol, or what, if any, sort of typical protocol would you have responding to a scene of this nature?
Yes, any sort of scene where it appears that the person is not going to survive, we would contact State Police CPAC unit
Okay, and why is that?
because they investigate all deaths.
So they have jurisdiction over all unattended deaths, is that correct?
That's correct.
As well as homicides, things of that nature.
Correct.
Now, once do you recall who, if anyone, you spoke to on that first call or notification to CPAC?
It would have been just the dispatch center on the first call.
And what, if any, subsequent calls did you have with regard to CPAC while you were on scene that morning?
I got a return call from Trooper Michael Proctor.
And from your conversation with Trooper Proctor, what was your understanding as far as their response to the scene at that time?
So at that point in time, Trooper Proctor informed me that they would not be responding.
Yeah. I don't know what that noise is, but if I could just ask you to repeat your last response, because frankly, I didn't.
Yes. In speaking to Trooper Proctor, he advised me at that point that they would not be responding.
And did he inform you as to why not at that time?
Objection.
Sustained.
Now, when you arrived on scene, what, if anything, did you note as far as the weather conditions?
The weather conditions were extremely poor. There were high winds, heavy snow, and freezing temperatures.
Now, you mentioned when you first arrived on scene, Mr. O'Keefe is in the back of that ambulance, is that correct?
That's correct.
And when was it that the ambulance left in relation to when you arrived?
Very, very shortly after I arrived, I would say within 5 minutes.
Now, as far as injuries to Mr. O'Keefe, who, if anyone, relayed any information in regard to that?
Sergeant Good advised me that
Objection.
Sustained.
Now, as far as following your conversation with Ms. McCabe, what was sort of the next steps that you took on scene?
after I spoke to Ms. McCabe, I advised her that we were going to need to speak with the homeowners. She said that they were probably sleeping. I advised her that we were going to need to speak with them, and that's when I placed the call to the CPAC unit.
And prior to that, when you were on scene, had you seen anyone come in or go out of the residence at 34 Fairview Road?
No.
And as far as sort of the other houses on the street, what, if any, activity did you observe with reference to any residents of those homes coming in or going out of their homes?
I did not observe anybody come in or out of their home.
Following your initial call to CPAC and conversation with Trooper Proctor, what is it that you did next?
once that call was complete, Sergeant Good and I observed that there was now a light on in the house of 34 Fairview, and we made the decision to then go in and speak with the homeowners.
And how was it that you sort of proceeded up to the home?
I believe, I don't recall if we used I believe we used the driveway, but I'm not 100% sure.
And you came into the home, recall which door that you used to enter the home?
The main door, the front door.
When you entered in through the main door, what, if you could describe to the jury sort of what you observed as far as what was before you from a layout perspective?
There was a staircase right in front of us, and to the right, it entered into like what appeared to be like a dining area.
And who, if anyone, did you speak with inside the home that morning?
Brian Albert and Nicole Albert.
And what, if any, relationship to the home did you determine based on your conversation with them?
They were the homeowners.
Now, Brian Albert, is that someone that you knew prior to January 29th, 2022?
Yes.
And how did you know?
I knew him as the oldest of the Albert brothers.
And did you know some of the other Albert brothers?
Yes.
And let me ask you this, Sergeant. Where did you grow up?
Canton.
And how long have you lived in Canton?
We moved here, we moved to Canton when I was 5 years old.
So essentially, since you were 5 years old, you lived in the town, correct?
Yes.
Okay, you work in the town, correct?
Yes.
Do you have children?
I do.
Any of them play sports?
They do.
Objection.
And sustain.
Move to strike.
Strike that.
What, if any, other sort of, other than living and working in the town, what, if anything else, is it that you do around the town?
I coach youth sports.
And how long have you done that for?
I would say at least 9 or 10 years.
And how would you describe your relationship with Brian Albert prior to that January 29th, 2022?
Civil?
The two of you friends? Do you socialize?
No.
Now, in addition to Brian Albert and Nicole Albert, who, if anyone else, where did you speak to them within the home?
Just inside the door by the staircase.
And how would you describe their demeanor when you were speaking to them?
They appeared, especially Mr. Albert, appeared disheveled, looked like he had just woken up.
And about how long a conversation was it between Brian Albert and Nicole Albert, that initial time?
I'd say 15, 20 minutes.
And beyond that, who, if anyone else, did you see within the home besides yourself, Sergeant Goods, and Mr. and Mrs. Albert?
Jennifer McCabe?
No one else at that time?
No.
Are you familiar with a gentleman named Brian Higgins?
I am.
And how are you familiar with him?
I met Brian when he was stationed at our police station. I don't know how many years ago it was, but he was assigned to our building years ago. That's how I met him.
And assigned in what capacity? And what I mean by that is, what did he do for work?
Brian is a ATF agent.
And did you see Mr. Higgins at any point in time during the time that you were at Fairview Road that morning?
Not on my initial response.
So sometime after, is that correct?
Yes.
And when about was that?
That would have been shortly after 9 a.m.
And we'll get to that in a moment, but after your conversation with Brian Albert and Nicole Albert inside the house, what is it that you did then?
Could you repeat that, please?
After talking to the homeowners, what was your next step on scene that day? What did you do next?
After speaking with the family, I came out. By that point, Lieutenant Gallagher was on scene and spoke with Lieutenant Gallagher as to what we were going to do next as far as the scene itself.
And to that end, what, if anything, did you or the other officers do with regard to sort of security of the scene at that time?
So we had put up some crime scene tape to try to protect the scene, but it was a futile effort because of the wind. But there were marked patrol cars in front of the yard at all times, so the scene was fairly secure at all times.
And then, with relation to the scene or the area that you were directed, or your attention was directed to as to where Mr. O'Keefe had been found, what, if anything, did you do with reference to that area?
I stood by and observed while Lieutenant Gallagher used a leaf blower to try to clear the top layers of snow off of the scene.
And at some point in time, well, that particular process, was that memorialized in any way?
Yes,
Okay, and how was it done so, Your Honor?
in my report.
Now, I'm sorry, beyond that, was there any sort of photos or video that were taken of that leaf blower process?
Yes, Sergeant Good was able to take video while Lieutenant Gallagher used the leaf blower.
And you've seen that video, is that correct?
Yes,
And what's contained in that video, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of sort of what happened on scene that morning?
yes.
Now, in addition to, well, let me ask you this, as far as the leaf blower was concerned, what was sort of the purpose of that, or what was the thinking behind that?
The purpose behind the leaf blower was to just take the top layers of snow off to reveal what was underneath and try to preserve any potential evidence.
And upon employing that, what, if anything, did you then observe in that area of the front lawn?
Ultimately, we were able to see what appeared to be blood drops in the snow, as well as a drinking glass, cocktail glass.
Now, in addition to the video that was taken with regard to the leaf blowing process, or the use of the leaf blower, were the photos that were taken of the scene as well?
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have exhibit number 27. Sergeant Lank, what's up on the screen that's been previously marked as exhibit 27? Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And what do you recognize it to be?
I recognize that to be the scene that we were working with the leaf blower.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
So I'm handing you a laser pointer, basically, very simple. Just press on that button and
Okay, thank you.
So, Lieutenant Lank, with using that laser pointer, if you could draw the jury's attention to what, if anything, of significance you observe in this photograph in relation to what you saw on scene that day.
So it appeared to see blood drops here in the snow that had been revealed by wiping away the top layer, as well as the glass protruding from the snow.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Gilman, you can take that down. Now, at any point in time when you were on scene, did you have any contact or interaction with a person named Karen?
I did not.
Did you see her on scene at all that day?
I don't recall seeing her. I believe she was there while I was there, but I never spoke to her.
Now, following your initial conversation inside the home of 34 Fairview with Brian Albert, Nicole Albert, and speaking to Jennifer McCabe outside, who, if anyone else, did you speak with that arrived on scene that morning?
Matthew McCabe.
And when was it that Matthew McCabe arrived in relation to sort of your arrival and when you spoke to the other people?
Matthew McCabe arrived just a couple of minutes after I had walked out of the house the first time.
And so when he arrived, where did you go?
Moments after he arrived, I went back into the house to speak with Mr. McCabe.
And about how long a conversation was it that you were in the house when you were speaking to Mr. McCabe?
I'm not sure. I'd say maybe 5 minutes.
And over the course of that morning, about how many times did you go into the residence at 34 Fairview Road?
3.
Anyone ever tell you that you couldn't go into the home or that stopped you at the doorway or anything like that?
No.
And with reference to inside of the home, what, if any, observations did you make of sort of how the home was situated, anything disheveled or anything like that?
Everything appeared in order.
And just if you know, what, if any, relationship does Matthew McCabe have to Jennifer?
Matthew McCabe is Jennifer McCabe's husband.
Now, turning back to what was just up on the screen in Exhibit 27, with regard to those items that you observed in the yards in the front lawn that day, what, if anything, did you or the other officers do with respect to those items?
The drinking glass was secured into an evidence bag, and the blood drops were secured into 6 solo cups.
And why were they secured into 6 solo cups?
We did the best that we could with the situation, with the weather and deteriorating situation. Lieutenant Gallagher was able to attain the solo cups from Lieutenant Kelleher's house, which was diagonally across the street.
Now, with respect to the CPAC unit or the phone call that you made to the state police, beyond sort of the jurisdiction of them having over unattended deaths and things of that nature, what, if any, other assets that the state police have at their disposal with regard to crime scene that your department has done?
They have crime scene units that process crime scenes.
Now, with respect to those items, once they were secured, just in reference to the solo cups, beyond sort of just putting them into solo cups, what, if anything else, did you or the other officers do to secure those items specifically?
They were secured into a brown evidence bag.
And following them being secured, where did they go from there?
They were then, excuse me, they were then placed into my truck at that point, my police truck that I was using that day, and ultimately transported back to the police station
And transported back to the police station by you?
by me.
And once you were back at the police station with those items, what, if anything, did you do with them at that time?
They were secured into temporary evidence in the refrigerated unit for the solo cups, and the glass was secured into temporary evidence.
And so when you say temporary evidence, why were they secured into temporary evidence?
They were secured into temporary evidence so that they could ultimately be turned over to the state police.
And as far as when you secure something into temporary evidence, just in general terms first, what is it that you do with that item to secure it or label it or anything else?
So it's assigned a property number, and we would print out a property label, and then that's assigned. It's assigned to the OF number, which is the report.
The OF stands for a report of offense, is that correct?
Offense, yes.
And so each report that you generate has a specific number with an OF following it,
That's correct.
and then that number is associated with the evidence that you secure, correct?
Yes.
Now, with reference to that evidence, whether it's temporary evidence or otherwise, what, if any, restrictions are there with regard to access to those items within your department?
So temporary evidence is accessible to all officers.
And to officers from your department, correct?
From our department, yes.
And following that, are you aware, or what, if anything, are you aware of what happened with those items after you secured them into temporary evidence?
I believe they were ultimately turned over to the state police.
May I approach the witness?
Yes.
So I'm handing you up a box. You recognize that?
Yes.
And what do you recognize that to be?
Appears to be a box to secure evidence with a call number on it.
And is that a box that you've seen earlier today?
Yes.
And with reference to what's contained within the box, have you seen that this morning as well?
Yes.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would ask that the witness be allowed to take what's in the box out of the box.
Okay.
Sir, just for the record, you have some evidence gloves with you in court today, is that correct?
That's correct.
Sorry, sir, before you just go into that, just with reference to the bag that you have before you, what, if any, markings are on that relate to sort of your case, your case number with Ken, please.
So it is there's a case number assigned to us, 22-870F, and there is a property number, 22-18PR, and it's listed as broken drinking glass.
Have
And
you seen the item contained within that bag earlier this morning as well?
yes,
And what you observed within that bag, is that the piece of the cocktail glass that you observed on the front yard area of 34 Fairview Road on January 29th, 2022?
yes it is.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would ask that the witness be allowed to take it out of the bag and display it to the jury.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. You can place it back in the bag. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, the Commonwealth will seek to introduce in a minute as the next exhibit. Now, Lieutenant Lank, once you were back at the police station, what, if any, call did you receive from anyone in regard to who, if anyone, called you once you were back at the station?
Jennifer McCabe called at 9 a.m.
And where did you go following that phone call with Jennifer McCabe?
Lieutenant Gallagher and I went back to 34 Fairview Road.
So this is now the third time that you've gone back and gone inside the residence at 34 Fairview Road, is that correct?
That's correct.
And who, if anyone, did you speak with, along with yourself and Lieutenant Gallagher, once you returned there that morning?
Jennifer McCabe.
Okay, and about how long a period of conversation was that second conversation that you had with Ms. McCabe?
Between 5 and 10 minutes.
And then following that, where did you go from there?
Returned to the police station.
Now, if I could turn your attention to February 4th of 2022. You working on that day?
I was.
And in the same capacity that you had described earlier?
Yes.
And at some point, well, approximately 8:50 a.m. or so, who, if anyone, calls you on that day?
Lieutenant Gallagher.
And what, if anything, or where did he direct you to go during the course of that conversation?
Lieutenant Gallagher directed me to go back to 34 Fairview Road and meet with Chief Berkowitz as he had possibly discovered more evidence.
And in the time between January 29th and February 4th, had you gone back to 34 Fairview Road at any point?
No.
Now, between that time of January 29th, 2022 and February 4th of 2022, what, if anything, occurred in regard to the weather in between those dates?
So the weather had, the temperatures had increased and there was some rain.
And increased, if you know, approximately how much?
I believe it made it up to the mid-40s.
So well above freezing, is that correct?
Correct.
And with regard to the snowfall that had come from the 28th and the 29th, what, if anything, just in general, had you, well, not in general, specifically to 34 Fairview Road, what, if anything, did you observe between the snow that you observed there on the 29th and the snow that you observed there on February 4th?
A lot of the snow had melted and a lot of the ground had been revealed.
And when you arrived at 34 Fairview Road on February 4th, what, if anything, did you observe and where did you observe?
Chief Berkowitz brought my attention to a piece of red glass that was about 6 to 8 feet off the into the yard.
Now, before we get to that, as far as when you responded, who, if anyone else from your department, responded along with you?
Detective Tim Taylor.
And the pieces of plastic that you observed, where were they in relation to where you had observed or where you had been directed to that Mr. O'Keefe had been found on January 29th?
The glass was in the vicinity of where Mr. O'Keefe had been discovered.
Now, with respect to that pieces of plastic that you observed, what, if anything, did you do to memorialize where they were?
I photographed the piece of plastic as it sat.
And did you or anyone in your presence touch, manipulate, or move those pieces of plastic in any way?
No.
And at some point after you arrived on scene, who, if anyone, did you contact in regard to securing those items?
I contacted the CPAC unit, and ultimately Trooper Buchanan arrived back at the scene.
And if you know about how much time elapsed between the time that you contacted CPAC and the time that Mechanic arrived?
I honestly don't recall.
And when Trooper Buchanan arrived on scene, what, if anything, did you observe him to do with those pieces of plastic that you directed his attention to?
Trooper Buchanan secured the item into a evidence bag.
May I approach your Honor?
Yes.
So I'm showing you two photographs. Just ask you just briefly to look them over and look up when you're finished. Do you recognize those, sir?
I do.
What do you recognize in those photographs?
I recognize this to be the piece of plastic that Chief Berkowitz had observed on that morning.
And those are the photographs that you took that morning as well, is that correct?
That's correct.
And what's contained in those photographs, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what you observed on February 4th, 2022?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, the Commonwealth seek to introduce and admit as the next two exhibits.
Okay.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have first of those photographs up on the screen. And, Lieutenant Lank, do you recognize what's depicted up on the screen currently?
Yes.
And this is sort of a further out image of that piece of plastic you were talking about, is that correct?
Yes.
And using the laser pointer before you, if you could just draw the jury's attention to where in the photograph you observed that piece of plastic. Thank you. Ms. Gilman, the next photograph. And sir, do you again recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, it's a close-up picture of the piece of plastic.
Thank you. Further, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Jackson?
Thank you, Your Honor. May we approach briefly?
Sure. All right, jurors, so you're about to hear evidence of an event that happened in 2002. This evidence can be considered by you insofar as it demonstrates or relates to the credibility of this witness and the thoroughness of the investigation into this case for which the defendant is currently on trial before you folks. You may use this evidence to the extent that you find it credible in deciding whether there was any bias or favoritism on the part of the police in their investigation in this case.
May I?
Mr. Jackson, yes.
Lieutenant Lank, I want to start by asking you about your relationship with certain members of the Albert family. Do you know any other members of the Albert family other than Brian Albert?
Yes.
Can you describe who those are?
Kevin Albert, who is a detective on our department, Chris Albert, and I know Tim Albert.
Are those three individuals brothers?
Yes.
Who is the eldest brother?
Brian.
How long have you known, I want to start first with Tim Albert. How long have you known Tim Albert?
I knew Tim Albert when he was a kid because he was friends with a younger brother of a friend of mine.
Starting at what age?
12.
So you've known
He was 12. I was probably 16 or so.
Okay, so the better part of your life, you've known Tim Albert.
Since about 16, I would say.
And what about Chris Albert?
Chris Albert I've known since junior high,
Which would be about what age?
13, 14,
You grew up with
12,
Chris?
12, 13. I was friendly with Chris from junior high through high school and into our 20s.
And friendly with Tim?
I wouldn't say I was friendly to say hello to Tim. I didn't associate with him. He was younger. He was Chris's younger brother.
But you also knew Chris's older brother, Brian?
Yes.
Back in those days.
I knew who he was.
So you've known the three of them for basically your entire life.
No, I had met them. I had met Brian. I didn't know him other than just being Chris's older brother when we were younger kids.
Certainly with regard to Chris, you would consider him a close friend.
Consider who a close friend?
Chris. I'm
Yes.
using first names only because they're all named
Sure,
Albert.
sure. Chris and I were pretty good friends when we were younger, yes.
I want to draw your attention to an incident in August of 2002. Do you remember an incident in 2002 occurring with, that involved Chris Albert?
Yes,
In 2002, in August of 2002 specifically, you were off duty, correct?
yes,
You had been drinking alcohol, correct?
yes.
You were approached by Chris Albert out in the parking lot, is that right?
That's correct.
And Chris Albert told you some information about being in a fight, that he had been in a fight or an altercation of some sort, correct?
He told me he had been in an altercation earlier in the night and some threats had been made to him and his family.
And you got out of your car and discussed this with Mr. Albert, correct?
No,
You just talked to him while you were seated in your car?
yes,
Okay, at some point, did some other individuals approach that same area?
yes,
Was there a fight that you believed was about to ensue?
yes,
Did you get out of your car at that point?
I did.
Did you come to Chris's aid by, quote unquote, activating yourself as an officer?
I got out of my car and I approached the group and I pleaded with them to not fight tonight. I said, there's not going to be a fight tonight. There's 6 of you guys. He's here with his girlfriend. There's not going to be a fight tonight.
Did you come to Chris Albert's aid as best you could as a longtime friend of his?
I came to the aid of a citizen who was in fear and of need.
That citizen happened to be Chris Albert, whom you had known since you were 12 years old.
Correct.
Ultimately, a fight did break out, did it not?
Yes,
And you engaged in that fight.
yes,
And again, you had been drinking alcohol at that point, correct?
correct.
And you were off duty in August of 2002 during this fight.
Yes,
Just like you were off duty in 2022 when you were called by Sergeant Good to activate and come to the crime scene at 34 Fairview.
when Sergeant Good contacted me, I was not working. I was due to work at 7:45 that morning. When Sergeant Good contacted me and told me what was going on, then I activated myself and came to work because I was the detective sergeant.
And that's similar sort of activation, using that word in air quotes, a similar sort of activation that you employed back in 2002 to assist Chris Albert.
No,
You did, in fact, call for someone to call the police and get some Canton officers over there, correct?
excuse me, so in 2002?
In 2002.
Yes,
Okay. And I failed to ask you this, but in 2002, you were, in fact, a Canton police officer
yes,
at the time. After the other officers arrived, did you order the other officers to handcuff or somehow restrain one of the 2 brothers that were involved in this fight with Chris?
no,
Ultimately, did you see whether or not those officers handcuffed or otherwise restrained one of the brothers that was involved in this fight?
yes,
And did you then engage physically in a fight with the other brother who was not restrained?
no. The struggle had already occurred.
All right. So let me make sure I get the timing right. You did, in fact, engage in a physical fight with one of the brothers, correct?
Upon being struck, yes.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Upon being struck, yes,
And then you struck him back.
yes.
You ended up on the ground.
Yes, we were wrestling, yes.
And ultimately, the other officers had to pull you off that man, correct?
No,
You ultimately, the fight was broken up between you and the other brother. Is that right?
that's correct.
All right. And that fight was broken up by the officers who were on scene.
Yes,
After this physical altercation with the brother who was not ultimately restrained, both of the brothers and everybody else was just told by the officers, just go away. Get out of here, go home, correct?
no, I believe one of the brothers left the scene, fled the scene, and the brother that was restrained was ultimately uncuffed
and left free to go.
And nobody was arrested that night?
Correct.
Nobody chased down the brother that left the scene, correct?
That's correct.
And nobody arrested the brother that had been handcuffed?
Correct.
And no police reports were written by you or any of the other officers about this incident on that night?
I don't recall when the other officers wrote theirs. I did not write mine on that night.
The next day, you became aware that one or both of the brothers had arrived at Canton Police Department to file a formal complaint for having been physically attacked by you and some of the other officers involved, correct?
I don't recall when I was made aware that they had come down to the police station.
You are aware that there was a complaint sought against you for the physical attack that was alleged to have occurred, correct?
It was brought to my attention that they had come down to the police station.
And you also are aware that only after that complaint had been sought, the police reports were then dated and filed against the two brothers, correct?
So I had spoken to the sergeant on duty the night of the
Yes or
incident.
no question. I'm just looking at the time.
It's not a yes or no question.
So he was just asking you about dates. So can you answer the question? Ask the question
Could you
about the
repeat?
dates again, please.
I'm seeking the chronology of events. The fight occurs, a complaint against you occurs, and then police reports are filed against the two people that are complaining against you. Is that the chronology?
Yes.
And you're also aware that although he had been in a physical fight that night, no charges were ever brought against Chris Albert, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
Do you know that?
I don't know. I don't even know where the fight occurred.
Officer Lank, what we just talked about, is that an example of you using your position as a police officer to come to the aid of one of the members of the Albert family?
It was me coming to the aid of a citizen who was terrified and scared for him and his family on that night.
Who happened to be
Who happened?
named what?
Excuse me, who happened to be Chris Albert.
You mentioned Kevin Albert. Who's he?
Kevin Albert is a detective with the Canton Police.
Is he a coworker?
Yes,
How long have you known him?
probably since 14, 15 years old.
And you also consider him to be a friend as well as a coworker
I do,
and a colleague.
yes.
And you're also well aware. I mean, you've said it already. He's the little brother of Brian Albert.
Correct.
And you're also aware that the reason that your department was ultimately recused from this investigation, Lieutenant Lank, is because of a perceived bias or conflict of interest between the Albert family and the Canton Police Department, correct?
Yes, there was a perceived bias.
Okay. Can you tell me one more time, now I want to fast forward to the incident in question. What was the exact time that you arrived at the location, if you know?
I believe it was around 6:24, 6:25.
Okay, and you indicated that that was in response to a call that you got from Sergeant Good.
Yes, that's correct.
What made you decide, or could you have decided, to take this particular call? Was it up to you, in other words?
I would never not take that call.
Okay, fair enough. So once you got the call, you knew that you were going to respond because there was something very serious afoot.
Correct.
Did you know at the time you got the call that that very serious incident was occurring at 34 Fairview?
No.
When did you realize that?
Upon speaking with Sergeant Good.
Okay, so Sergeant Good didn't, I guess that's what maybe I asked an inartful question. I was asking whether or not Sergeant Good told you before you actually arrived, he sort of had to have, that it's at 34 Fairview.
He did.
Okay. At that point, did a light bulb go off and you think to yourself, ding, that's the Albert house?
I don't recall if I realized it then or once I turned onto the street. I don't recall.
At some point before your car came to a stop, you knew this is 34 Fairview, this is the Albert household.
I knew that was Brian Albert's house, yes.
When you arrived, who was the ranking officer at the scene? You mentioned, obviously, we've heard these names, Sergeant Good, there's Officer Mullaney, there's Officer Seraph, you. Who was the ranking officer?
When I arrived, Sergeant Good was the ranking officer.
Have you reviewed either, well, let me ask a different question. Did you have a dash cam in the vehicle that you arrived in?
I did not.
And that's because it was that a detective vehicle?
Yes.
Sometimes used undercover, et cetera?
Yes.
So it's not a fully marked cruiser.
No, not at all.
The other cruisers you're aware did have dash cams, correct?
Yes.
Have you reviewed any or all of those dash cams from Officer Mullaney, Officer Seraph, Sergeant Good?
Yes.
And you reviewed those in preparation for your testimony?
Yes.
I'd like to show you what's been previously marked as Exhibit 16. And I'm going to ask Mr. Bates if you could fast forward that to about the runtime of about, 28:35 or so, with the court's permission.
Yes.
Before we play this, it appears to be a still image of,
So let's not describe it.
sure. What do you see on the screen?
I see two still images.
Okay. Do you recognize either or both of those images?
Yes.
How do you recognize them?
It looks like the scene from that morning, from, I believe it's going to be, the top one anyway is that 683 Officer Seraph's cruiser.
And the bottom one?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Looks like possibly Sergeant Good's based on where it's placed.
Okay. You indicated that you have reviewed these videos in anticipation of your testimony today, correct?
Yes.
I'm going to ask you to direct your attention to the top video, and specifically to an area right around this area in the video, which is highlighted. Before we play, a couple of foundational questions. Did you meet with Jennifer McCabe out behind the vehicle that's depicted in the Officer Seraph dash cam?
Yes.
Did you have some sort of a conversation with her?
I did.
At some point, did you see Ms. McCabe leave your presence and walk toward the driveway?
Once the conversation had terminated, I honestly don't recall where she went.
Did she tell you that she intended to go inside the house?
I had said to her that at some point we're going to need to speak to Brian and Nicole
Why did you think it was important to speak to Brian and Nicole?
because it's their property.
And somebody was laying in the snow, unconscious and unresponsive, correct?
Correct.
And obviously that could potentially, at least, implicate people inside the house.
Based on my conversation with Ms. McCabe, she had stated that the intention was for Mr. McCabe, for Mr. O'Keefe to join them at that house. So I wanted to get statements from everybody who was there.
Find out what happened, correct?
Correct.
I mean, that's sort of the obvious initial point of an investigation. Find out who the witnesses are and interview all of them, correct?
Correct.
And you began by talking to Ms. McCabe,
Yes.
knowing that she was a potential witness at least, correct?
She identified herself as a friend of Mr. O'Keefe.
Who had been with Mr. O'Keefe just hours before.
Yes.
He ended up laying in the snow fighting for his life, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you also knew that there were other witnesses potentially inside the house because she just told you that, right?
I knew that that was ultimately where he was supposed to end up.
So if there were other witnesses in the house, if there were other individuals in the house, they also were potential witnesses.
Potentially.
And Ms. McCabe indicated, I'm going to go in the house, correct?
I had told her that she's going to have to wake her sister up because we're going to need to speak with them.
You didn't think that it was more important to separate the witnesses and not let her talk to other witnesses?
No.
You thought that it was appropriate to let all the witnesses get together and just discuss the facts before you had an opportunity to interview them separately?
Objection.
Stand as to the form.
Lieutenant Lank, if you could direct your attention to the area that I highlighted earlier. Let's go ahead and play the video. Stop. Did you see anything occur at or around the car in the distance?
It appears to be somebody walking towards the house.
Was that Jen McCabe?
I can't say for sure.
Do you see yourself, by the way, in this video?
Yes.
Where are you?
Right here.
Okay. You've described sort of the, I don't know if it's tan or gray.
It's a gray North Face jacket with it's black on the top.
Okay. Toward the shoulders?
Yes.
All right. Let's go ahead and play the video, and I'll indicate another stopping place that I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about. Apologize. No, go. No, sorry. I'm standing in front of someone. Did you see another person shorter in stature approach you?
I believe right there. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Who is that?
I believe it's Kerry Roberts.
Okay. Let's go ahead and play it. Pause it. Did you see yourself just exit screen right?
Yes.
It appeared that you had something in your hand.
Yes.
You were taking a call
Yes.
on your cell phone.
Yes.
What was that call?
I don't recall. It could have, I can't see what time that is. I don't believe that I made the call to the CPAC unit until around 6:38, so I'm not sure who that call was from.
If you'll direct your attention, I think now down toward the camera below,
Yes.
you may see yourself enter the frame. Can we go ahead and play it? Go ahead and pause it. Does it appear you're on the phone?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead. Pause it. Did it appear that you walked off screen left?
Yes.
Still on the phone?
Yes.
Go ahead. Pause it. Did you see somebody following that same direction?
It looked like Officer Seraph.
Go ahead and play it.
Actually, I'm wrong because that's Officer Seraph right there, so I'm incorrect.
You think it might have been Sergeant Good?
Could we play it back?
With the court's permission.
Sure, go ahead.
Pause. Do you recognize that person?
Yes, I'm mistaken. That's Sergeant Good.
Okay, go ahead. Pause it. Does it appear that you've walked back into the frame?
Yes.
Are you followed by anybody?
I believe it's still Sergeant Good.
Are you speaking to Sergeant Good or are you walking away from him? Or can't you tell?
In that frame, it appears I'm standing right next to him.
Okay, let's go ahead and play it. Pause it. Did it appear you were sort of walking away from Sergeant Good off frame again?
Yes, it appears that I'm pacing.
Were you still on the phone?
Yes.
Thank you. Go ahead. Pause it. Directing your attention to the top video, do you see the SUV in the video?
Yes.
Does that SUV appear to be leaving the scene?
Yes.
Do you know who was in that video? In that SUV?
I believe it's going to be Kerry Roberts and Karen Reed.
Okay, go ahead and play it. Pause it. At that point, are you walking back into the frame on the lower video?
Yes.
At this point, Lieutenant, are the lights on at 34 Fairview on or off?
They still appear to be off.
And at some point while you were at the scene, did the lights come on? I think you testified to that earlier.
Yes.
Okay. I'd like you to pay special attention to that moment and maybe tell me to stop when you see those lights come on. It may be a minute or so.
Sure.
At this point, does it appear that you're still on the phone?
Yes.
How's it? At this point, is there anything that changed in the scene?
Yes.
What's that?
It appears that there's now a light on inside the home.
And at this point, Ms. McCabe has been inside the house for approximately how long, if you could estimate?
Maybe 3 minutes.
And are you still on the phone? Or have you ended that call?
I can't tell if I'm still on the phone at that point. I know that right around this time is when I end up speaking to the CPAC unit, because I believe I get into the vehicle.
Let's play it just a little bit further forward, maybe another 30 seconds or so. Stop it. Does it appear at this point, if you can see, does it appear that you've ended that call, or at least your hands are down by your side?
I can't tell.
Okay. You would agree with me, that's all I have for that. You would agree with me that that was without counting the seconds, that was about a 5-minute phone call, or maybe a little better than 5 minutes?
I wasn't watching, to be honest.
Do you have any idea who you were talking to now that you've seen that?
I could make an educated guess, but I don't know for sure.
You did notice that several minutes after Jen McCabe went in the house, And while you were on that phone call, the lights finally came on at 34 Fairview, correct?
Correct.
At the point the lights came on, the ladder truck had already gone, left from the scene, correct? The fire engine.
I believe so.
The firefighters are all gone.
Yes.
The ambulance has already left and transported Mr. O'Keefe.
Yes.
The paramedics are gone, the EMTs.
Yes.
Fire captain and his SUV, that's gone. Is that right?
I'm sorry, was there a question?
The fire captain and his SUV, that's gone.
I'm not sure.
In other words, all the fire and EMTs have.
I don't see them on camera.
Doesn't appear that any fire or EMTs are still on scene, correct?
Doesn't appear so.
Carrie Roberts is gone.
Yes.
Karen Reed is gone.
Yes.
So when the only parties left at the scene are members of the Albert family, Jen McCabe, and the Canton Police Department representatives, that's when the lights inside 34 Fairview finally came on.
Okay.
Is that yes?
Yes.
And then minutes after that call, you did then speak to to dispatch, correct?
CPAC dispatch.
Right, I was getting to that. It was a dispatch, and the dispatch was to CPAC, not to Canton PD.
Correct.
And at some point, did CPAC dispatch indicate that they were on their way, they had declined the call? What was that call all about?
So there are two separate calls.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Who did you talk to at CPAC?
I don't recall who handled the first call at dispatch.
Okay, do you remember having a conversation with Kelly Dever?
No.
Okay.
I think we're talking about two different things. I'm talking about CPAC dispatch, not Canton Police dispatch.
Okay, fair enough. At some point, did you have a conversation with, well, let me ask it this way. I just don't know. Did you talk to both Canton Dispatch and CPAC Dispatch?
I definitely spoke to CPAC dispatch.
And okay,
I'm not sure if I spoke to Canton dispatch or not.
all right. At some point, did you say, did you indicate to one or the other, I'm responding to 34 Fairview, we have a Boston police officer who was just found?
I stated that I was already at 34 Fairview.
You indicated
I
that he
believe.
does have some trauma to his head area, correct?
That's correct.
And you said, quote, I'm not sure if he's been in a fight or whatever. Our medics don't believe he's going to make it,
Correct.
end quote. Sergeant Lank, you never saw John O'Keefe's body, correct?
Correct.
So somebody disclosed to you that it appeared that he had been in a, quote, fight or whatever, at least at that point. That was your thought.
No.
And what made you say, well, you didn't say to dispatch, the victim appears to have been shot, correct?
Correct.
You didn't say it appeared he'd been stabbed.
No.
He had been strangled.
No.
You didn't say it appeared he'd been hit by a car.
Correct.
You said it appeared that he'd been in a fight or whatever, correct?
I stated that he had some trauma to his head, and I said, I don't know if he has been in a fight, and then I believe I described it as I don't remember my exact terminology, but it was a crazy scene,
Chaotic scene?
possibly. I don't recall my exact words, something to that effect.
But you do recall your exact words to dispatch being, I don't know if he's been in a fight or whatever.
Correct.
Okay. I want to talk about inside the house for just a few minutes, if I could. You've talked extensively about the crime scene outside, and we'll get to that in a second, but I want to talk about what did or did not happen inside the house. Did you actually make it inside the house at some point?
Yes.
Okay. When was that? How long? Let's use Jennifer McCabe as the time frame. How long after that did you finally go inside the house, after she'd been in the house?
So it was specifically just after I got off the phone with CPAC.
So just a few minutes after we ended that video.
Yes.
And you walked you said either along the driveway or through the yard.
I believe it was up the driveway.
Okay. Once you went in the house, you made contact with the individuals in the house, correct?
Yes.
And you believed, at least at that point, that there was a potential, that there was a, let me rephrase that. You knew that you were dealing with a violent incident, correct?
No.
You thought maybe it was just a heart attack?
I didn't know what it was. At that point in time, I didn't know what it was. Could have been a multitude of things.
But what was going through your mind at that point was it could have been a fight or whatever, because he had trauma to his head. Those were your words.
Those were my words, yes.
Okay, so you didn't think it was like some old man who died of old age, right?
Based on his age, no, I wouldn't have suspected that.
You didn't think it was an accidental drowning or something?
Again, it could have been a multitude of things to cause those injuries. So at that point in time, we had no idea what we were looking at.
But you were aware that it had something to do with a violent incident. He had trauma to his face and he's unconscious, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Did you believe that there were any indicators that Mr. O'Keefe had been involved in some sort of a physical altercation?
Possibly.
Okay. And that's because you used the phrase, he had trauma to his face and head, right?
That's what I had been told, yes.
So based on what you had been told, you knew that there was a person laying out unconscious just outside a residence that may have been involved in a physical altercation. That's fair.
It's a possibility, yes. But again, there were a multitude of things that were going through my head as possibilities.
But that's one of the premier possibilities, right?
I wouldn't say it's premier, it was one of the possibilities.
And it's logical to believe that if a fight had occurred, very well may have started inside the residence 30 feet away.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Did you believe in your mind that it was possible, given the fact that a violent confrontation was possible in your mind, that it could have started inside the house?
Objection.
Sustained.
May we approach?
Yes.
Ma'am?
Sure.
Lieutenant Lank, given what you believed at the time and the possibility that there was a fight or whatever, did you logically think in your mind, your state of mind was it possibly could have started in the house?
If it had been a confrontation, it could have started anywhere.
Right? The house is part of anywhere, right?
Correct.
So in other words, the house is not excluded in your mind at that point as a starting point for the investigation. Is that right?
Well, the starting point would have been where Mr. O'Keefe had been discovered, and then based on speaking with the witnesses, there was no indication that he had ever made it into the house.
Well, you didn't know that until you followed up on your investigation, correct?
I learned that by speaking to Ms. McCabe.
So you just took Ms. McCabe's word for it.
At that point in time, that was the only person I had spoken to, and she gave me a timeline of events from that night where Mr. O'Keefe was supposed to come back to the house, but never made it.
Have you ever been, in your course of investigating cases, have you ever been lied to by a witness?
Objection, Your Honor.
Can you answer that? Have you ever been lied to by a witness?
Yes.
So it's not necessarily the best investigative technique to just take a witness's word for something, correct?
Objection.
That's sustained.
You need to actually investigate the circumstances for yourself and to your own satisfaction. Is that a fair statement?
Sure.
One of those investigative techniques would be to walk into the house and figure out who's who there, correct?
Can you rephrase the question?
Sure. One of those investigative techniques to satisfy yourself that you're actually getting to the truth of the matter would be to walk into the house and figure out who's in the house first.
I will agree that I needed to speak to the people in the home. I can't just walk in their house. I have to announce myself, and they don't have to let me in.
I understand. I'm not trying to parse those words. I just mean entering the home and interviewing witnesses. That would be a normal part of your investigation initially, correct?
Yes.
And you also knew that the most obvious place to look for witnesses that may have information about a fallen man in the snow would be 30 feet away in the home, correct?
Correct.
So once you're inside the residence, you walked in the front door, correct?
Yes.
You indicated that there's a stair that services the second floor. Is that right?
Straight ahead, yes.
Right. Just before the staircase, there's a door to your left, right?
I don't recall.
You remember whether or not there's a door that when you open it, goes directly downstairs to the basement?
I don't recall.
You indicated on direct examination that you didn't notice anything, I'm paraphrasing, so forgive me. You didn't notice anything out of place in the home.
No,
But you didn't go downstairs to the basement and look, did you?
no.
Didn't look for broken furniture down there?
I didn't enter the basement at all.
You didn't look for torn clothing down there?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
How about anywhere in the house? Did you look for broken furniture or torn clothing or blood evidence or DNA evidence?
At that point in time, I never made it past the front foyer area.
So the answer to my question is no, you did not.
I never made it past the front foyer area.
So if I were to ask you one more time, I know you never made it past the foyer. Did you ever investigate the foyer area or any other part of the house for evidence of a fight?
The only area I was able to observe at that point, everything appeared to be in order.
But you didn't search the rest of the house for a fight, Lieutenant. That's all I'm asking.
No, I wouldn't have had probable cause to do so.
And did you seek guidance from a court as to whether or not you might have probable cause?
Do you mean a search warrant?
That's what I mean.
I wouldn't fill out an affidavit for a search warrant because it wouldn't have probable cause.
In your mind, there was no PC to search that house, right?
Objection.
Let's move on from this.
One of the ways to secure a premises, any premises in a normal crime scene investigation, would be to remove the witnesses and animals from that premises to sort of freeze it and lock it down, correct?
If there was reason to do so, yes.
Okay. Were the witnesses in this case asked to come outside the house in order to freeze the house down as a potential crime scene?
No.
Were any animals removed in order to freeze and lock down the house as a potential crime scene?
I didn't observe any animals.
Did you, and this is the last question on this issue, did you do anything to lock down and secure that premises, the inside of the house, in any way, shape, form, or fashion?
Can you rephrase that, please?
Sure. Did you do anything to lock down and secure that premises in any way, shape, form, or fashion?
No.
Did you allow witnesses to go inside the house other than Jen McCabe?
Yes.
Who was that?
I believe Matt McCabe entered the house after I had come out.
And did you seek to separate any of the witnesses or admonish them that they are not to be in each other's presence and discuss the facts of the case before you had an opportunity to interview them?
No.
And as you sit here, you have no idea, when you were not in their presence, you have no idea what the occupants of that house were discussing
Correct.
or what they were doing.
I have no idea what they were doing.
Given the fact that you were the first law enforcement officer inside the house, did you seek to photograph anything inside the house?
When you say I was the first law enforcement officer, I was with Sergeant Good. Both of us walked in at the same time.
That's fair. I don't mean to be vague, but you were sort of leading the discussion, correct, with the interviews?
Yes.
At least according to Sergeant Good, you were taking charge.
Sure.
As the first law enforcement officer to take charge inside the house, did you seek to photograph that
No.
premises or that location?
No, I did not.
Did you make any drawings or diagrams of the layout of the house?
No, I did not.
Did you note where the furniture was or was not?
I don't know what you mean.
Did you note in a diagram where furniture was? There's a dining room table here. It's got 6 chairs. There's a kitchen table over there.
No, I did not.
Did you note in any document where the individuals were, the human beings were, in relation to each other when you walked in the house?
Are you asking me where I were, or did I make a
I'm asking you
diagram?
whether or not you documented that.
No.
Had you been told at the time that you went in the house that John O'Keefe was found out in the yard that there was a shoe missing? His right shoe was missing.
No,
You didn't have that information yet?
I did not.
Did you subsequently learn that?
I learned that much later after we had already cleared the area.
Tell me what much later means. Days, hours, weeks?
I honestly couldn't give an exact answer on that.
I think I know the answer to this, but you didn't do any search for any missing clothing from the victim inside the house.
I did not.
Last question on this, or last series of questions on this issue. You understand the importance of electronic devices in modern investigations, correct?
Yes,
iPads, cell phones, things of that nature.
sure.
Because they can record things like photographs, videos, conversations, text messages, and emails.
Yes,
Would you consider electronic devices relatively vital in modern law enforcement investigations?
I'm sorry, violent?
Vital.
Yes,
Critical.
yes,
Right? They're critical items of evidence, right? It's like walking around with your entire life in your palm of your hand, correct?
correct.
Did you seek to secure any electronic devices from any of the occupants of that house that morning?
No,
Did you ask for consent to look through their electronic devices, for instance, their cell phones, for text messages or communications?
no,
Did you believe, well, turning back to a question that you were asked by Mr. Lally, you did in fact interview Brian Albert at the scene, correct?
yes,
You also interviewed his wife.
yes.
Did you believe at any point before you interviewed Mr. Albert that it was incumbent upon you to let your supervisors know that there may be a conflict of interest because of a personal relationship that you had with the family?
Objection.
Sustained.
Did you ever, in fact, not whether you believed it was important, but did you ever, in fact, notify any of your superiors at Canton PD or any other law enforcement agency that you had a personal relationship with the Albert family or members of the Albert family?
I did not.
You indicated that you believe you spoke to Mr. Albert and his wife, Nicole Albert, for maybe 15 to 20 minutes. Is that what you said?
Roughly.
Did you record that conversation?
I did not.
You had your cell phone with you, correct?
Yes,
You know that has recording capability.
yes.
Was anybody else with Nicole? When I say with, I mean in earshot of Nicole and Brian Albert when you interviewed either one of them or both of them?
Jennifer McCabe.
So you interviewed them together.
Yes.
Did you then interview Jennifer McCabe?
I had spoken to Jennifer McCabe outside. To the best of my memory, I believe once we were inside, I was able to get some more information from her based on the chronological order of events.
And when you were getting this information about the chronological order of events, that was within earshot of Brian Albert and Nicole Albert.
Yes,
So when you interviewed Brian Albert, Nicole and Jennifer McCabe were listening, correct?
yes,
When you interviewed Nicole Albert, Brian Albert and Jennifer McCabe were listening.
yes,
And when you got this chronological layout of the night before from Jennifer McCabe, Brian and Nicole were both listening.
yes.
After you met with the three of them and interviewed them, you indicated that you came back. You had already left, you came back. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, so forgive me. When you came back, it was around 9 a.m.?
No. I came back just moments later.
Had you actually left? I may be a bit confused, so I apologize. Had you actually left and driven back to Canton PD?
No.
Okay, so you just came back in the house?
When Mr. McCabe entered the house,
No, I'm so sorry. I'm jumping ahead, so that's unfair. You left, now we're at the point where you've already cleared the crime scene.
okay,
And then at some point you get called back
yes,
because Ms. McCabe said she had additional information she wanted to impart.
yes,
When you interviewed Ms. McCabe that second time, were Brian and Nicole Albert there?
yes,
Were they within earshot?
yes,
And they listened to that conversation as well.
yes.
After that conversation, did you meet with any other witnesses between February 29th, later in the day, January 29th, any time until February 4th?
No,
None.
no.
I do want to talk for a second, just a brief second, about setting up a crime scene outdoors. You indicated that the crime scene was relatively secure, was your word. It was relatively secure because there were patrol cars or cruisers sort of around the perimeter
Yes.
of the yard. Is that right?
That's correct.
Crime scene tape wasn't working because it was windy.
Crime scene tape was up, but it was being blown all over the place.
Okay. And of course, Canton PD has the ability to go get stakes and just hammer some stakes into the dirt if you wish to.
No.
You don't have stakes at Canton PD?
No,
I
we-
mean stakes, E-S-T-A-K-E-S.
I know what a stake is. No, we don't have any.
Canton PD doesn't have those.
No.
So if the crime scene tape was blowing down, that was just sort of a let's give up on it. Wasn't doing any good.
No.
In your mind, it was futile.
The crime scene tape was futile, yes. It was left up until we made the determination to take it down, but it wasn't really doing its job.
All right. And once the scene was cleared, all those cruisers that were protecting that crime scene were now gone, right?
Yes.
And all the cruisers were gone by about 7:50 in the morning, 7:50, 7:55.
Yes.
So before 8 a.m., that crime scene was completely open. I'm sorry, after 8 a.m., that crime scene was completely open,
Yes.
unsecured,
Yes.
and available to anybody who wanted access to it.
Correct.
One of the reasons to secure a crime scene is to minimize the possibility of evidence destruction on one hand, correct?
Yes.
And evidence tampering on the other hand, right?
Sure.
And examples of evidence tampering could be just moving a piece of evidence.
Objection, Your Honor.
That's overruled. Just not too much further with this, though.
I've just got a couple of quick questions about this.
Could you repeat that, please?
Sure. An example, or a couple of examples of evidence tampering could be something as simple as moving a piece of evidence, moving it from here to here, correct?
That would be tampering, yes.
Hiding evidence, getting rid of it, right?
Yes.
Taking evidence out of the scene or putting evidence back into the scene, correct?
Yes.
Or even planting evidence that didn't exist before. All of those would be examples of tampering with evidence.
Yes.
And setting up a proper crime scene minimizes or eliminates the possibility for that.
Setting up a crime scene would could you say that again, please?
Sure. Setting up a proper crime scene, securing a proper crime scene minimizes or tries to eliminate the possibility of that type of evidence tampering, obviously.
It would, but at this point in time, we weren't aware. At this point in time, state police had said they weren't responding. So there was no longer an area to preserve at that point.
So in your mind, well, let me phrase it a different way. What that means is after 8 a.m., that scene was just open.
It was.
You found both the blood that we saw pictures of and the cocktail glass that we were just introduced to this morning, correct?
Yes.
You searched the area that was adjacent to where you believed the body was. Is that right?
We searched, I would say, about a 6x6 or 7x7 area,
6x6 or 7x7?
roughly. 6 feet on each side.
Right. You were looking for obviously anything that was out of place, anything that didn't belong,
Yes.
like a man's size 12 shoe would have caught your attention.
It would.
A black baseball cap would have caught your attention.
It would.
Piece of plastic broken probably would have caught your attention.
Yes.
Certainly 45 pieces of plastic would have caught your attention.
Yes.
And between you and Officer Seraph, Sergeant Good, Officer Mullaney, Lieutenant Gallagher, none of that was found.
The only things we found were the things that were documented.
You did find the blood, however, is that right?
Yes.
Who literally physically leaned down and scooped that blood up?
Me.
And that was done in a plastic solo cup that we've heard a little bit about. Is that
Yes.
right?
Yes.
You're aware that those solo cups are unsealed.
I believe Lieutenant Gallagher got them out of a sealed package.
When I say unsealed, I mean they don't have a lid on them. They're not airtight containers.
Correct.
So once you scoop up the snow and the dirt and the debris and the grass and everything else, along with the blood, they're just open to the air.
Yeah, there was snow and blood. There was no dirt and debris in the glass that I can recall.
You're sure about that? There's no dirt and snow?
I didn't observe any, no.
You didn't observe any dirt in the snow? You don't think there's dirt in snow?
I didn't observe any dirt in the glass. Excuse me, the cup.
Okay. Certainly wasn't the sterile cup.
No,
Certainly wasn't the crime scene cup.
no.
You're aware that the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab warns against collecting any biological material in anything made of plastic, correct? Are you aware of that?
No.
When you scooped up the blood, did you videotape that process so we know exactly which blood stain was scooped up from where?
I don't recall if it was videotaped, but we did not document which scoop went in which cup.
Okay. So if there was multiple contributors to blood, multiple contributors of the blood, we'd sort of have no idea which blood drop belonged to whom, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Once these unsealed cups were in your possession, what did you do with them?
The cups were placed into the Toyota Tundra that I was driving that day and ultimately returned back to the police station.
Okay, and you talked a little bit about the process once you returned back to the station. They were put in a brown evidence bag, correct?
Yes.
And ultimately, when you log these items into the, tell me the name of it again, it's the temporary evidence?
Temporary, excuse me, the blood was put in temporary evidence refrigerator.
Okay, inside the evidence bag. Cups are still inside the evidence bag and it's logged in.
I don't recall that. I'm not sure if I took them out or not. I don't recall.
You indicated that there's an item number or property number that's assigned to them.
Yes.
There is generated a seal or a label to go on the evidence that's being stored, correct?
It should, yes.
And the bag is sealed. The evidence bag is sealed like this red tape that we see on this thing, correct?
When possible, there are certain items that can't be bagged, and then sometimes you create a tag and attach it to a tag.
Right, but if it's a brown paper bag that's an evidence bag, you certainly just fold over the edge of it and just put a red evidence seal on it to make sure that that's secure and not tampered with, correct?
That would be one way to do it, yes. I don't recall if I left them in the bag or took them out of the bag. I don't recall.
If you left them in the bag, you likely would have, if you're booking them into evidence, you likely would have used some red crime scene,
Yeah.
not crime scene tape, evidence tape.
If I had left them in the bag, I would have put the property label right on the bag.
So everybody could see it.
Yes.
Okay, there's an evidence bag with important evidence in it. Don't mess with it. It's secure, correct?
Yes.
Can we have tab 23? Do you recognize what's depicted in this exhibit?
I believe it's Miss Reed's vehicle.
For the record, you're looking at what's been previously marked as Exhibit 37. You see the little white rag down there by the right rear quarter panel?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go to tab 24. You see that white rag?
Yes.
Sorry?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Did you see a bag sitting next to it?
I do.
Doesn't look like an evidence bag, does it?
No, it looks like a Stop and Shop bag.
Stop and
But
Shop.
actually, it looks like an evidence bag. It just doesn't say Canton Police on it. It says Stop and Shop, but it does look like an evidence bag. It's the same thing.
That's a grocery bag.
It is. And that's exactly what our evidence bags look like, so that's what I thought it was at first.
Right, except it doesn't say anything about evidence on it. It says Stop and Shop, correct?
Correct.
What do you think's in that evidence bag? I'm sorry, Stop and Shop bag.
I'm not sure.
You were when these pictures were taken?
I could tell that it's the Canton Police Sally Port, so it's some point after the state police had seized the vehicle.
And at some point after you had brought the solo cups back to the station.
Correct.
As a matter of fact, these were taken on February 1st when the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab finally took possession of these items of evidence, correct?
I was not in the police station for those 2 days.
Let's look at the next tab, tab 25. You recognize that?
It appears to be solo cups with substance inside.
Are those just any solo cups, or those the solo cups that you took back to the station from 34 Fairview?
I mean, I couldn't say definitively, but it certainly looks like it.
It appears that they have red liquid material floating in the bottom
Yes.
that appear to be blood.
The top three I can see, yeah, the only two I see that don't have it are the bottom two left.
Okay, let's look at the next tab, which is 26. And do you see somebody with gloved hands opening that bag? Same bag, little white rag right there?
I do.
Okay, that appear to be the same 6 solo cups?
That you just showed me in the previous slide?
Yes.
Yes.
Are those the same 6 solo cups that you gathered at the scene at 34 Fairview and ultimately brought back to Canton PD?
They certainly appear like they are, but I can't say definitively, but they appear to be.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on your words. Go ahead. Pretty sure.
They appear to be the same solo cups, but I couldn't say definitively.
Let's go back to tab 24. And the reason you can't say definitively, Lieutenant, is because there is no label on this bag, is there?
Not on that side of it, no.
There is no property number on this bag, is there?
Not on the side that's visible to me, no.
There's no evidence tape on this bag, is there?
Not on the side that's visible to me, no.
Well, let's look at the other photographs. Are you, well, before we do that, are you suggesting that all of that material is on the other side of this bag?
I don't know. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you I don't know.
Okay, let's look at the next tab. Looking at it from the top, does it appear anywhere from that vantage point that there's evidence tape that's ever been put on that bag, that has ever been secured?
I wouldn't be able to tell you that.
Well, one of the ways that you can tell that evidence tape has been put on an item is because when the evidence tape is placed on it, it's completely sealed. And if, in fact, that seal is ever broken, it's not torn off, it's cut, and there's initials put on, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Have you ever used evidence tape before? To seal anything?
I'm sure I have. I don't recall off the top of my head.
How long have you been a detective? I'm sorry, how long were you a detective when you were a detective?
I was a detective for 11 months as a sergeant, and then I was a detective for 15 months back in 2011-12.
And in your experience, and how long have you been a police officer?
Over 24 years.
So in your 24 years of experience and over a year as a detective, you can't remember if you've ever used evidence sealing tape?
As I said, I'm sure I have. I just can't recall one off the top of my head.
If you can recall using it at all, isn't the protocol that when evidence sealing tape is used to seal an item of evidence, when it's removed, it's not torn off, it's cut, and then new sealing tape is put over it with an initial and a date, correct?
Objection.
Do you know the answer to that?
I don't.
Okay, next question.
Thank you. That's all I have for this.
Okay. Mr. Lally?
Thank you, Your Honor. Just briefly, sir, with regard to incident you were asked about from August of 2002, can you explain in your own words what happened?
So I had left the establishment, Centerfields is what it was called at the time, and the owner had asked me if I could drive a patron home who had too much to drink, so I obliged. Walked across the street to the parking lot, got in my truck with the patron, and as I was pulling out, that's when Mr. Albert approached my truck and told me how he had been in an altercation earlier in the evening with Mark Lapalato, and that Mark had made threats towards him and his family, that he was going to harm his family. They had a young child at the time. Mr. Albert was concerned and asking me what he should do. Excuse me. As I was telling him what I think he should do, he said something to the effect of, "Oh no, here they come." And I observed multiple men walking down the sidewalk in our direction. At this point, I got out of my truck, approached the group, and pleaded with them. I said, "Guys, not tonight. He's by himself. He's with his wife, girlfriend. There's not going to be a fight tonight." And I did my best to defuse the situation, but they weren't having it. They made several attempts to push past me. Ultimately, a wrestling match ensued. Mr. Lapalato at one point said, I know who you are, I don't give a fuck, and asked me what I was going to do about it. A wrestling match ensued. I was punched, and at that point, I defended myself and did engage in a physical altercation with Mark.
Now, you were asked about sort of timing of reports. You didn't write a report until a couple days later, is that correct?
That's correct.
Why was that?
I had spoken to the shift supervisor that night, and I asked him if he wanted me to return and generate a report at that point, and he advised me that I could do it the next time I was at work, which was a couple of days later.
And as far as the police responding to that parking lot that night, how were they notified, if you know?
I had yelled across the street when the group was trying to push its way past me. I yelled across the street to the bartender and the owner had made their way, excuse me, out onto the sidewalk street area. I yelled across the street and I said, call the police, and they ultimately called 911.
Now, what, if any, relevance or factor did any of that have in your minds in regard to your response and interviews or anything that you did on January 29th, 2022?
Absolutely nothing.
And in fact, that involved Christopher Albert in 2002, correct?
Yes, it did.
And you were at Brian Albert's residence in 2022, correct?
Correct.
And just to be clear, just because their last name is Albert, they're separate people, you have separate relationships with each of those persons, correct?
Correct.
Now, you grew up in the town, you work in the town, fair to say you go to calls regarding people that you know,
Yes.
whether that be witnesses, people that you arrest, any of the like, correct?
Correct.
Now, with regard to the questions that you were asked about Mr. O'Keefe, just to be clear, you never laid eyes on Mr. O'Keefe's body at any point in time on January 29th or thereafter, correct?
No, I didn't.
You were asked some questions about, on the cruiser cam video, whether you were on the phone. You indicated that you could make an educated guess as to who you were on the phone with. Who would that be?
Lieutenant Gallagher.
And so at the time that you're on the phone from that video, Lieutenant Gallagher was not on scene yet, correct?
Correct.
Now, with respect to the weather on that day, you talked a bit about sort of the weather as you were on scene. During the time that you were on scene, did it essentially persist in the same manner?
Yes.
And then later on that day, what, if any, change occurred with regard to the weather?
As I recall, while we were there, it stayed the same. If anything, it might have gotten even worse.
And from your memory of that day, did that continue throughout the course of the day while you were working?
Yes.
Now, with regard to in the house at 34 Fairview Road, each of those occasions, if you could, with respect to the 3 occasions that you went inside the house to speak to people, where were those people within the house?
The first time I went in, Brian Albert and Nicole Albert were located, I believe, on the stairs or sitting possibly at some point on the stairs. Jen McCabe was to my right. The second time I went back in, excuse me, was also through the front door. And it was the same positioning, except this time Matt McCabe was present, and Matt was also to my right.
And then on the third occasion, when yourself and Lieutenant Gallagher came back to speak to Ms. McCabe further?
We went in through the door to the right, so it's to the right of the main door. We went in through that door and stayed in like the dining kitchen area, and that's where I spoke with Jennifer.
And that third time that you went back and you spoke with Jennifer, where was Brian Albert, Nicole Albert, Matthew McCabe, any of those parties that were there before, if you know?
They were present. I actually don't recall if Matthew McCabe was there the third time. Brian and Nicole were definitely there. I believe they were in the general vicinity, but I couldn't tell you exactly where they were.
And same thing when you went back on that third occasion, what, if anything, did you note as far as the interior of the house, anything askew, anything out of place?
No, everything looked to be in order.
Nothing further. Your Honor.
May we approach very briefly?
Yes.
Mayor, Your Honor.
Yes.
Very briefly, Lieutenant Lank, you indicated that you claimed in your description that you were assaulted by the Lopalito brothers, correct?
Yes,
The fact is, they were never convicted of anything having to do with this case, the case that you're describing. Isn't that true?
correct.
You also indicated that they made either a threatening comment to you or a disparaging comment to you about, I don't give a fuck, correct?
Correct.
Isn't it true that what was actually said was you said to them, I don't know who you are, but I'm going to make your life miserable?
No,
All of this incident was in furtherance of you protecting a member of the Albert family when they asked for your help, correct?
no, it was me protecting someone who asked for my help who was clearly in fear.
Who happened to be an Albert.
Happened to be an Albert.
Thank you.
All right, you are all set. Thank you. Lieutenant, you're all set, sir.